Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show. Just to remind everyone, it is Google's policy. YouTube's policy. YouTube is owned by Google, of course. I should introduce the show. I'm a little discombobulated today. My name is Kevin Michael Grace. It's the KMG Show for Friday, December the 11th, 2020. So, YouTube has decreed that Joe Biden occupies the office of the president-elect, and that any videos that dispute this or endorse various hypotheses about a stolen election will be taken down. So, just to make it clear, YouTube's policy is perforce my policy. Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election fair and square, and anyone who disagrees is a conspiracy theorist. However, the fact that the election is disputed is news, so I am going to report on that news, making it clear that I am merely repeating other people's opinions, not my own. Let's start with Donald J. Trump's Twitter feed. 1 hour ago, Georgia, where is signature verification approval? What do you have to lose? Must move quickly. And this is addressed to the governor of Georgia, the Secretary of State, and Jeff Duncan, who is the lieutenant governor of Georgia. 3 hours ago, Trump tweeted, if the Supreme Court shows great wisdom and courage, the American people will win perhaps the most important case in history, and our electoral process will be respected again. Again, 3 hours ago, if the two senators from Georgia should lose, which would be a horrible thing for our country, I am the only thing that stands between packing the court, last number heard, 25, and preserving it. I will not, under any circumstances, pack the court. Melissa Tate, described as Christian conservative author, Trump-Republican wife, mother. One of her tweets was retweeted by Trump, and of course it has the disclaimer from Twitter, this claim about election fraud is disputed. She wrote, Joe Biden will not set foot in the White House. 170,000 votes in Michigan have just been discovered to not have a trace to a registered voter in Michigan. 9 hours ago, now it turns out that the Democrats want to pack the court with 26 justices. This would be terrible and must be stopped. Even Justice RBG was strongly opposed. 10 hours ago, Trump tweeted, now that the Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess for years to come, it is much easier for the Supreme Court of the United States to follow the Constitution and do what everybody knows has to be done. They must show great courage and wisdom. Save the USA. 3 exclamation points. Now, of course, the usual suspects created the hashtag trending. Trump conceded. No, he has not conceded. After all of these years of looking at Trump's tweets, you would think that they would have recognized by now that Trump does this in a hurry. It is not vetted by anyone or checked for grammar, spelling, etc., etc. So no, he has not conceded. And it is my belief that he is not going to concede. Jim Kunstler writes this morning that sometimes life really is like a bad dream. When you think of the U.S. Supreme Court, it's probably the image of its august Greco-Roman facade, expressing the conjoined ideas of democracy, ancient Greece, and a republic, classical Rome. Or else you might imagine the grand courtroom inside, always featured in drawings because photos aren't allowed, which is the ultimate performance space for the law of the land. But there must be quite a backstage area, offices for the justices and their clerks, and surely some kind of boardroom or even a comfy lounge full of overstuffed leather club chairs a fireplace, and a sideboard with the cut crystal sherry bottle. Would you suppose that the 9 justices, or at least the 2 divisions of them, get together there and palaver informally over dockets and cases? I would. Now imagine, Kunstler writes, they are palavering over the current case at hand brought by Texas with what, 18 other states now, plus the president in for backup? Is the court really reluctant to take the case, as the media gossip says? Maybe. But if they do take it, would they eventually rule to not disturb the current disposition of the election, even as alleged to be rife with ballot fraud out of fear of venturing into a constitutional wilderness, as other gossip has it? Maybe. But what happens then? Hey, whatever you think of Donald Trump, he has been POTUS for 4 years with access to a whole lot of non-public information about his colleagues in government, including who among them have been playing footsie with the tentacles of China and lots more. Accordingly, and prompted by 4 years of nonstop seditious harassment by a deranged Democratic Party, would you suppose he had a plan to meet some version of what played out on November 3rd? I would. I would suppose, for instance, Kunstler continues, that Trump's military intelligence allies saw in real time on election night all the packets of internet data that Dominion vote tabulation machines in the USA sent across the Atlantic to the Dominion server lodged in the CIA's Frankfurt, Germany cyber warfare station. This, you understand, when those Dominion machines in the USA were forbidden by law to be connected to the internet. If you're a regular reader here, you will recall the recent report of a U.S. Army Special Forces operation going into the Frankfurt CIA station directly after the election and seizing servers there. Assume that they underwent forensic dissection afterward. If you were President Trump, would you suspect that the CIA might be playing dangerous games with you and, by extension, the nation? Are you aware that China has a 75% investment stake in the holding company that now owns Dominion? Are there grounds to suppose that China somehow interfered in the election with assistance from an eager Democratic Party and the CIA? Would Trump, of all people, let such a thing stand, especially considering the evidence that the putative winner of the election, well, as YouTube reminds us, the actual winner and president-elect, Joe Biden, the kid from Scranton, PA, was up to his eyeballs with the rest of his family in Chinese funny money, not to mention money from Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russia, and other lands. Note, information about this evidence gleaned from Hunter Biden's forgotten laptop was deliberately suppressed in October by the major newspapers and cable news stations with help from Facebook, Twitter, and Google, along with a claque of 50 former and current Intel officials led by John Brennan, who denounced the reports from the New York Post in a public letter as Russian disinformation, yet another seditious conspiracy among the swamplings. Are you aware that in the weeks since the election, there have been unusual movements of U.S. military aircraft around the country, including C-130 Hercules troop carrier planes, and that the Navy has 2 carrier groups out along the Pacific coast and 3 strung along the Atlantic coast? That's what I hear, Kunstler writes. Remember, the president cleaned house at the top of the Pentagon this fall, and probably not for nothing. Sounds like preparation for something, some extraordinary executive action to prevent the national security risk known as Joe Biden from being sworn in as president, in the absence of anything else in a strictly constitutional way that would keep that from happening, like a Supreme Court decision that would order the rare passing on of the disputed 2020 election to the House of Representatives for resolution, with a strong statistical likelihood that the body would re-elect Trump. These are the sort of things I imagine the Supreme Court justices might be palavering about and weighing over their sherry in the comfortable back room of their August clubhouse. There is, of course, the likelihood that such a momentous decision to send the vote to the House would provoke a violent, batshit crazy response from the Democratic Party street warriors, BLM, and Antifa, thus the C-130 flights perhaps deploying troops around the country. This time, expect the black blocs to get their asses kicked, and swiftly. Expect also a mind-blowing raft of arrests of political celebrities on charges like treason. Does it sound like a bad dream? Yeah, kind of does. But there it is. Let's go to the chat. Happy 201st show, Brandon Smith. I just want to say thanks to all of the people that sent me congratulations on my 200th show, many of which included kind comments on the quality of the show. Thanks again. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, writes, "We got a show that virus, who's boss?" Jokerkin 666 went for x-rays at my New York's largest hospital, absolutely empty. Radiology is usually a madhouse. Yo Mama says, "These are wicked times we live in." Hello, friends. Scottus rejected Texas lawsuit. Hang on a second here. Did they? Oh, no. This was the first time around. So let me check this. Supreme Court dismisses Trump's bid to overturn the election. Okay. This was posted at 4 o'clock Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. This is from CNN. The Supreme Court rejected a bid from Texas's Attorney General, supported by President Donald Trump, to block the ballots of millions of voters in battleground states that went in favor of President-elect Joe Biden. The court's move to dismiss the challenge is the strongest indication yet that Trump has no chance of overturning election results in court, that even the justices whom he placed there have no interest in allowing his desperate legal bids to continue. The lawsuit, brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, a staunch Trump ally, sought to sue Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and Wisconsin, which all went for Biden, and invalidate their election results. And this week, with his options narrowing, Trump, accompanied by the support of several Republican attorneys general and GOP lawmakers, cranked up pressure to have the Supreme Court weigh in. Trump and his legal team, hamstrung by a series of coronavirus diagnoses among lawyers who had traveled across the country advocating on behalf of Trump's case, have for weeks pushed increasingly desperate appeals and baseless conspiracy theories about his second term being stolen. The court did not provide a vote count, but there were no dissents to the order made public. Separately, Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas said they would have allowed the case to be filed, but would grant no other relief. For the past 5 weeks, federal and state courts have rejected most of Trump's attempts thoroughly. Hastily written filings that contained a multitude of elementary errors. Many of the pro-Trump arguments hinged on what was ultimately hearsay or conjecture. And in many of the cases, Trump backers have said they don't have evidence proving their allegations yet, but want to review ballots or confidential elections data more closely to see if they can find proof of fraud. And though Trump has refused to move on, those closest to him, including the legal team and his family, are working on their next steps. Multiple sources have told CNN earlier this week that Trump's legal team and inside what remains of his campaign staff have been sensing that efforts to overturn or delay the results of the election are coming to an end. White House staffers are resigning or out the door, and members of Trump's cabinet have also begun meeting with their Biden administration counterparts. First Lady Melania Trump, meanwhile, has begun overseeing shipments of family furniture and art to Mar-a-Lago. And Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner are in the final stages of purchasing a plot of land within a Miami enclave known for its privacy and high net worth residents. So I guess this means that much of what I had put on my sched to talk about is no longer relevant. Let's see what a J5 killer has to say. If the judiciary and the legislative bodies decline to protect the Constitution, the executive must act. This is a genuine constitutional crisis. The president has no choice but to intervene to restore the integrity of our electoral process. And later than that, a reminder that presidents can and have ignored courts in the past. Andrew Jackson famously said, Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. J5 Killer says, and besides, there's nothing to ignore here. The Scottish declining to take a case does not prevent the president, the head of a co-equal branch of government, from acting unilaterally to resolve a constitutional crisis. This is a crisis of legitimacy. The executive must act. Essentially, in the Texas lawsuit, you had something like about 20 states suing 4 other states, with a bunch of other states coming in on the side of Pennsylvania, Michigan et al. This is essentially the war of all against all. So, yeah, Donald Trump claims Revelation Hunter Biden is under federal investigation will convince Supreme Court justices to overturn the election because Biden administration will be scandal-plagued mess for years to come. It turns out that Hunter Biden has been being investigated by the Department of Justice since 2018. Yeah. Both these stories are from the Mail. Bill Barr knew for months that Hunter Biden was the subject of a federal probe and kept it secret during the run-up to the election as Trump blasts the FBI and Department of Justice. Okay. So what else do we have here? Obviously, anything about the Texas lawsuit is now moot, as lawyers say. I see the Canadian Daniel Dale, formerly of the Toronto Star, now with CNN, and of course he's a former Glee cast member, was fact-checking the Texas case, which I find hilarious. What education does this fellow have? I see he has a Bachelor of Business Administration from York University's Schulich School of Business. Yes, so he knows about as much of the law as I do. Actually, I know a little bit more than him because I was a legal clerk for 2 years. But will CNN have much use for him if Trump leaves? Now, I don't think that Trump is going to leave, but the knives are already out for Trump, of course. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime, as they used to say in the Cheka, the NKVD. This is from the mysterious website DNYUZ, which I learned from a report about Drudge on the tablet, that is to say the Jewish tablet, not the Catholic tablet, that this website, DNYUZ, is apparently from Armenia, and its purpose is to take news material from which hides behind paywalls and simply rewrite it slightly. But in any event, state prosecutors in Manhattan have interviewed several employees of President Trump's bank and insurance broker in recent weeks, according to people with knowledge of the matter, significantly escalating an investigation into the president that he is powerless to stop. The interviews with people who work for the lender, Deutsche Bank, and the insurance brokerage, Aon, are the latest indication that once Trump leaves office, he still faces the potential threat of criminal charges that would be beyond the reach of federal pardons. It remains unclear whether the office of the Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus R. Vance, Jr., will ultimately bring charges. The prosecutors have been fighting in court for more than a year to obtain Trump's personal and corporate tax returns, which they have called central to their investigation. But lately, Vance's office has stepped up its efforts, issuing new subpoenas and questioning witnesses, including some before a grand jury, according to people with knowledge of the matter. The grand jury appears to be serving an investigative function. Oh, so it's a fishing expedition then. And Cyrus Vance, that name sounds familiar. Let's look him up. Born in 1954. He's the son of Cyrus Vance, former Secretary of State under President Jimmy Carter. How about that? Projection from the Washington Post. Can Trump's lawyers get in trouble for frivolous lawsuits? Yes, making the accusation that the 2020 election was stolen. Of course, we know that it wasn't, because YouTube has certified Joseph R. Biden as the president-elect. The thing, though, our legal system has mechanisms to combat frivolous lawsuits, says Senator Ben Sass, conservative from Nebraska. Broadly speaking, there's supposed to be a price to pay for flooding the zone with the kind of dubious claims and alleged PR stunts that have characterized the Trump's legal strategy. But will the lawyers involved face such penalties? Legal ethics experts are skeptical, even as they suggest they might be warranted. Yeah, so that's the way they're going to play it, are they? They are now going to go after all the lawyers who represented Trump. With regard to the Supreme Court not having jurisdiction, dispute between the states, and the Supreme Court of the United States has no jurisdiction there. The Supreme Court, and I believe 1965, in Griswold versus Connecticut, managed to find a right to privacy in the Bill of Rights, and there is no right to privacy in the Bill of Rights. This was a question about whether the state of Connecticut could ban the sale of contraceptives. And then 8 years later in Roe v. Wade, we had Harry Blackmun's famous emanations from a penumbra, which gave the Supreme Court of the United States the right to regulate abortion. Contraception and abortion, of course, are state jurisdictions, but the Supreme Court has many, many times since the 1950s invented, one might say, frivolous reasons for interfering in state jurisdictions. Okay, so, all right. I found this amusing. The sinister David Axelrod, former Obama senior advisor, this is from Pam Key in Breitbart, said on CNN's Cuomo Prime Time that members of Congress who support President Trump's election fraud claims and the 18 state attorneys general forwarding a lawsuit to contest the presidential election results of 4 battleground states were cowards. He said, let's just be clear about one thing. The president said yesterday, he said, let's see who has the courage to do what everyone in the country knows is right. Let's talk about courage. Courage are those Secretary of State and election officials who, under threat of violence against them, wow, he is projecting up a storm here, and their families and political repercussions, projection.text, did their duty, counted the votes, verified the votes, recounted the votes, and proclaimed a winner based on the will of the people in their states. That is courage. That is courage. What these people are doing, these 18 attorneys general, the members of Congress, Representative Johnson said the president is eager to see the list of who signs on. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? These people are cowards. They're cowards. So let's be clear of who is showing the courage and who is showing cowardice here. It will be problematic for Biden because Trump is not going to do what other presidents do. He will try to lead the resistance from outside, and he will threaten Republicans who don't do what he wants to do. Oh, resistance. I suppose it would be easy enough to search David Axelrod's statements in the last 4 years to see whether he has ever used the word resistance and indicated his membership in it. Meanwhile, many prominent Democrats announced themselves to be the leaders of a resistance, which some people might see as sedition or treason. But of course, there are different rules for Donald Trump than anyone else. Robert A. George, who is a leading American conservative, writes in Bloomberg, Trump's Republicans are a faction, not a party. Well, that's not what the polls tell us about the number of Republicans who support Trump, even unto these lawsuits. Not only do the president's words and actions increase the potential for violence, and 2020 hasn't seen any violence, has it? We have, Biden taking the knee and Kamala Harris taking the knee and supporting Black Lives Matter. Now, in the name of Black Lives Matter and St. George Floyd, a number of American cities were pillaged and looted. this year. No, but you see, it's Trump's words and actions that increase the potential for violence, but they are actually doing actual harm to American democracy. And since Trump is a 74-year-old man who is not going to change, it's up to elected Republicans to put a stop to this madness, as at least one Republican, Senator Mitt Romney, has had the courage to call it. Yeah, okay. Mitt Romney didn't have the courage to talk about the Reverend Jeremiah Wright when he ran for president. No. Let's go back to the good old days when principled conservatives lose. They lose, and lose again, and then they pat themselves on the back for their rectitude and their courage. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Okay. I think I'm here now. DB Cooper says Ben Sass is human garbage. His physiognomy does not instill confidence, I must say. William Hicks says, I took in the full hearing in Georgia yesterday. There was a fellow with charts from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. It made me think of that scene in Fargo when Marge says, it'd be quite a coincidence, if they weren't connected. Yes, over 170,000 votes in Michigan that are not connected to Michigan. And, well, I guess that's just an anomaly. It's just an anomaly. And there's all sorts of anomalies. Anomalies are everywhere you look. They are not connected, in fact, because everything that happens in life is entirely coincidence. The idea that there are people scheming, plotting to do things. No. That never, ever happens. And I think that it's just irresponsible to even entertain that notion. Jay Miller says, if you guys live in Georgia, please vote in the special election. It is imperative, especially after this BS. Yes, both candidates are complete Muppets, but a Democratic-led Senate is worse. Okay, the MSM is entirely to blame for everything, says British American. Kevin and others thought there could be a coup if Trump did anything to stop the riots earlier this year. If he does something now, well, the Department of Defense has been cleaned out, has it not? Oh, let's see. Senate to Donius Trumpus, disband your army and return to Rome. Yes, another allusion to Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. He felt that he had little choice but to do so because the Senate had made it clear that he would be proscribed because no longer a consul, no protection. So we are going to, well, take all your money and exile you at best or kill you and your family at worst. Rather similar to what's going on. Brandon Smith says, can't be many people left who doubt the sanctity of the election process now. Jay Miller says, yeah, we can't have a Dem-led Senate. Yeah, they are unimpressive candidates, especially Perdue, who is the CEO of Dollar General, which is basically a conduit for Chinese junk. David Wright says, I, for one, welcome our new CCP overlords. No, it's remarkable to me, that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, allegations, Hunter Biden, and we know that Hunter Biden got millions from China. We have a former close business associate who says that Joe Biden was involved. We know that Joe Biden has been a China booster for the longest time. These are incendiary allegations, and the media decided, no, that's not a story. It's all Russian disinformation. Well, thank you, Professor Pohl, for your kind words. Your mama says, what is beyond a federal pardon? D.B. Cooper says, making up some state charges. British British American says, when is anyone going to look at the evidence of what was contested at the Supreme Court? Well, it was decided right from the beginning that it was outrageous to even consider this. And all of the shocking things that happened, it's moot. It's all moot because Joe Biden is president-elect. And, that is a fact. It's a fact in the same way that, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. William Hicks says Scottus had no trouble scuttling voting rights Proposition 8 in California in Obergefell, and the ruling was hailed as a victory for civil rights. 13.7 million voters. Wanderingsburg says, Shalom all. Okay, the sunset right now outside my window, though. Jefferson should have had... Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. And British American mentions the Insurrection Act. There's been a lot of talk about that in the last couple of weeks. And in his 46-minute Facebook address, Trump alluded to it and listed conditions which would enable the Insurrection Act. But, we'll see what happens as always. And I suppose that, let me just go through the places that I was going to talk about and see whether there is anything that is still relevant. This is funny. This is from Amy Furr at Breitbart. Senator Ted Cruz criticized Representative Eric Swalwell's relationship with a suspected Chinese spy in a tweet on Thursday. More than once, Cruz said, I've said, screw the Chinese communists. Little did I know how closely Swalwell was listening. It turns out that Ted Cruz is a pretty funny guy, which is not the impression you would have got during his 2016 presidential race. On Wednesday, Fox News asked Swalwell's office whether his relationship with Fang, that is, was ever sexual or romantic. His office said they had no comment other than what they had told Axios. That, again, I'm thinking this is the perfect excuse, that a wife says to her husband, I notice you took $2,000 out of the bank yesterday. What was that for? Sorry, dear. That information is classified. I noticed that you have made plane reservations to Miami. Why are you going to Miami? I'm sorry, dear, that is classified. Or after a party, who was that woman you were talking to for so long? Again, classified. I'd love to tell you, but honestly, I can't. I can't. It could be treason, Okay, so nothing there. That is useless. And this site is useless. Let's see what Vox Day has to say. So, by a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court renders itself irrelevant. This is hardly a surprise. I never had any more faith in Barrett than in Roberts. Perhaps there are a few more permutations and a little more drama before the court option is entirely closed, but it's becoming increasingly likely that the decision to preserve the Constitution will fall to President Trump. May God grant him wisdom and inspire him to make the right decision. It's worth noting that prior to the election, Alexander Macris shared his doubts that it really mattered what the Supreme Court decided. Quote, no matter what the Supreme Court rules, 70 million Americans are going to be very unhappy. For 46 states, 4 legislatures, 3 territories, and 2 governors of the union to be involved in this lawsuit tells us that the stakes are incredibly high. Indeed, this is the gravest constitutional crisis since 1860. As usual, there's little reason to believe that the Supreme Court's decision will put a definitive end to the crisis. Dred Scott didn't stop the U.S. Civil War, and Texas versus Pennsylvania may not stop whatever comes next, unquote. Vox Day comments, indeed, but as always, wait 2 days after Trump's initial comments in response to this abdication by the Supreme Court before reaching any conclusions. My immediate thought is that the president needed for all other options to be exhausted and allow all other hopes to be extinguished before taking on the burden of crossing the Rubicon by invoking the Insurrection Act. So, moving on, let's talk about the War on Christmas, COVID-19 edition. Of course, there's no such thing as a war on Christmas because apparently in the United States, Christians dominate the culture and they shout down all people who disagree with them. It's people would like to see, sex in movies or pornography and all this, but they can't because those puritanical Christians just have a vice hold on culture and on the media and on academia and on a big business. What is the latest from Drudge? I noticed that he hasn't updated his page to reflect the Supreme Court decision. Military-grade camera shows risks of airborne spread. Video. Bill Gates. I'll get to Bill Gates in a minute. Viral spread. Americans paying price for Thanksgiving. Deaths rising by 9/11 proportions each day. 200 hospitals at full capacity. 1/3 almost out of ICU space. Indoor dining outlawed in New York City. Okay. But I want to talk about the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, from Charlie Spearing in Breitbart. The governor announced new coronavirus restrictions Thursday and urged people of faith to stay out of their churches during the Christmas season. This year, we need to think about what is truly the most important thing. Is it the worship or the building? Northam said at a press conference. For me, God is wherever you are. You don't have to sit in the church pew for God to hear your prayers. He urged faith leaders to lead the way and set an example for their communities. Worship with a mask on is still worship. Worship outside or worship online is still worship, Northam said. Northam conceded that he could not legally limit in-person worship ceremonies, noting that the recent Supreme Court decision against the state of New York prevented him from doing that. But he blamed churches for contributing to the spread of the virus, noting that some houses of worship were not social distancing or wearing masks. I have heard reports, he said, they don't use distancing inside the church. They are not wearing masks. Quite frankly, we know that a lot of the spread is coming from this. Northam also instituted a curfew from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., arguing that it was better not to be out of the home late at night. I will also say something that my parents taught me when I was younger, and that is nothing good happens after midnight. I thought it was Bill Cosby that popularized that phrase. Northam also ordered all bars and restaurants to stop selling alcohol at 10 p.m. Social gatherings must be limited to 10 people, he added, down from the previous 25. He also mandated that everyone wear masks indoors, even if a group remains socially distant. So what do we know about this Ralph Northam character? Well, we know that he got into trouble a couple of years ago when it was discovered that he wore blackface in his picture in his high school yearbook. And later, when he was in the military, he had the nickname of Coon Man. But here's something more interesting about him. Well, apparently he attends a majority Black Baptist church, which I'm sure has nothing to do with the embarrassment over the Blackface Institute. But there is the little matter of infanticide. On January 30th, Northam had made controversial comments about abortion during a WTOP interview about the Repeal Act, where he stated that if a severely deformed or otherwise non-viable fetus was born after an unsuccessful abortion attempt, the infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. Conservative politicians and media figures characterized Northam's comments as promoting infanticide. Yeah, how about that? How about that? But he is one of the many celebrities in the United States who have been infected by the corona doom. Both he and his wife. And apparently, one of them, yes, on September 25th, 2020, Northam and his wife tested positive for COVID-19 after one of their staff members became infected. The governor was asymptomatic. His wife suffered mild symptoms. Wait a minute, I thought this disease killed everyone who got it. Now we find out that Ellen DeGeneres has COVID-19. Apparently she's feeling fine too, just like Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf. Of course, many people have claimed that Ellen DeGeneres is lying about having COVID-19 because for some reason this year she became a widely hated figure. For years or decades, she had been America's favorite lesbian, but these stories came of her about her being mean to her staff and not being fawning enough towards some transgender person who was a guest on her show. I hold no brief for Ellen DeGeneres. I would just say that hosting a television talk show, is a very stressful business. I used to be a talk radio producer, which is not as stressful as being a TV producer, but it is pretty stressful. And let's say there were a lot of tense moments, between me and my boss or me and other producers. It goes with the territory. Working on talk shows is not for the weak and those people who easily burst into tears. But you may have noticed that in recent years, celebrities who have gotten in trouble, been involved in various scandals, drink, drugs, sex, whatever, that it used to be de rigueur for them to claim that they were suffering from exhaustion. And I guess that got played out because more recently it's Lyme disease that they're suffering from. And there is a famous Australian who some years ago, she had been accused of being a homewrecker because she had taken up with a married man, and the comments in the media were not very kind. And shortly thereafter, she announced that she had breast cancer. Oh, well, we can't say anything about this woman because she has breast cancer. Well, she appeared to have made a very quick and complete recovery. And it was never brought up again, although I have seen in many places people stating forthrightly that they believe that she simply made it all up in order to deflect attention and garner sympathy. Let's see. Yes, I came across this video, which has 2,400 retweets from Jeff Berwick at Berwick Jeff. This is Kerry Mullis, inventor of the PCR test. He said the tests are meant to magnify material, not test, for diseases. He says that Fauci is a fraud and a liar. He says in this video, which is, let's see, it's just over 2 minutes long, that Fauci knows nothing about anything. He also says more than once that Fauci is a liar, that he lies in public repeatedly. It is true the PCR test was invented in order to magnify material, to better study it, but now it is being used to test for COVID-19. And as we know from no less than Cambridge University, it has an exceedingly high rate of false positives. It's from the Sydney Morning Herald, a $1 billion deal for the Morrison government to buy more than 50 million doses of the University of Queensland's potential coronavirus vaccine has been abruptly terminated after several trial participants returned false positive HIV results. UQ, working in partnership with Australian global biotech company CSL, will abandon its current clinical trials following the discovery. It informed the federal government of the initial data on Monday. Apparently, this is true, that the head of the FBI has been ordered by the White House to approve the Pfizer vaccine. Alex Berenson says this is bad, and I fully agree. If you've been listening to this live stream, I've been expressing doubts about the rush for this vaccine, because as we know, the data which is produced by pharmaceutical companies to prove that experimental drugs are in fact both safe and efficacious, it's dubious in many cases, because pharmaceutical companies obviously do not want to flush hundreds of millions or billions of dollars down the drain. And there is little independent verification of these studies, little to none, that is done by federal health authorities such as the Food and Drug Administration. Essentially, they take the drug companies at their word. Now this is fascinating. This is from the CBC. Canada introduces national compensation program for vaccine injuries ahead of pandemic vaccine rollout. The announcement of the No Fault program is part of Canada's preparations to roll out coronavirus vaccines, beginning with the Pfizer-BioNTech version that will start to be administered last week. Health Canada says it approves vaccines after its thorough review of scientific evidence shows that the benefits outweigh the risk. Canadians can have confidence in the rigor of the vaccine approval system. However, in the rare event that a person experiences an adverse reaction, this program will help ensure they get the support they need, Health Minister Patty Hajdu said in a statement yesterday. All medications and vaccines can lead to side effects and reactions. Thank you for that, CBC. Common and mild ones, such as fevers, aches, and pains, are evidence of your immune system being activated as planned and is working to build up immunity, infectious disease physicians say. In contrast, the federal government said the chances of someone experiencing a truly serious adverse reaction are extremely rare, less than 1 in a million. How about that? Earlier this week, UK regulators temporarily paused delivery of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to people with a history of anaphylaxis after 2 adverse events occurred during healthcare workers with such a history. Okay, there is no mention of Bell's palsy in this story, which is not surprising from the CBC, because they love Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau is going to be the savior who brings us all the vaccines. This is very amusing. It was in fact predicted by Peter Hitchens about a month ago. This is from The Guardian. The public are throwing away 53 million masks every day in the UK in a waste mountain that risks creating a major environmental crisis, a waste company has said. The huge number of face masks being put into the bin or dropped on the street is raising concerns about the amount which might be leaking into rivers and the sea, said Charlotte Green from waste company Trade Waste Co. UK. If you walk around any street now, you will see disposable face masks being blown around with the leaves in the gutter. They are the new cigarette butt. People are chucking them after use. We know that 53 million are being sent to landfill every day, but just how many end up elsewhere is the very scary part. Hitchens joked that it won't be long before we read piteous stories about dolphins or some such choking on masks. And this from Scott Wilson of the Washington Post. The pale blue is easy to spot among the dry brown reeds. People walk here along the northern coast of San Francisco Bay, crowding a path that bends to the contour of the shore. At the small pebble beach near a park called Blackie's Pasture, a surgical mask is tangled in the marsh at the edge of the bay. A little farther on is another, then another on the other side of the path, waiting to be blown into the sea. I mean, this is a high wealth area, and even here you see it, said Peter Otteson, a fit 74-year-old tossing the ball to his black lab, Addie, on a recent clear morning. It's not like cigarette butts or anything else. You see it on the sides of the path, the sides of the road, and if you don't see it, you are not looking. Since the pandemic began earlier this year, masks have become a go-to item of the national wardrobe, especially here along the California coast where mask wearing rates are high. But many are careless with the new accessory, and in windy places, like many along the state's 840-mile coast, the masks and other products are ending up on sidewalks, skittering into storm drains, blowing onto beaches, and ending up in the Pacific Ocean and its bay. Oh, yes. How badly do you feel about COVID-19? How depressed do you get thinking about it? Do you shed tears, for the empty seat at the table, as Joe Biden put it? Never mind that, given that the average age is 82, that means that, and we know that the overwhelming majority of people who are dying from this are people who have been put into old age homes of one sort or another. So they haven't been at the family table for quite some time. This is from Mediaite. Fox News' Harris Faulkner snapped at network contributor Marie Harf after she called out Outnumbered for not talking about how the coronavirus is still killing people at a record-breaking pace. Country singer John Rich was the one lucky guy on Outnumbered's Thursday show, so he regaled the panelists with an impromptu song bashing Democrats for their hypocritical actions throughout the pandemic. Shortly after that, Harf lamented that the show was mostly over by that point, and no one had brought up the fact that the United States just reached a grim milestone of 3,054 COVID-related deaths in a single day. Oh, I like that phrase, COVID-related. Harf stressed that American public health regulation should be scientifically driven and that the conduct of America's leaders is not always perfect. She said that we cannot lose sight of the tragedy that is unfolding everywhere in the country, in large part because people want to go about life as normal, and a lot of people don't want to wear masks, even though the evidence is overwhelming that they save lives. As we have discussed, the compliance rate in America's cities is well over 90%. And the evidence is not overwhelming that masks save lives. Faulkner accused Harf of taking a shot against the show and responded, "If you don't think that our hearts are big enough to mourn the people we have lost during this pandemic, what exactly are you trying to say?" That is offensive and not true, Faulkner said. "Please keep your judgment someplace where you know you can fact check it, because you can't see my heart. And trust me when I tell you it hurts all of us to mourn those Americans and people around the world." 3 million Americans die every year. And I haven't noticed that on panel shows that every day, oh, how many people died today? Let's have a moment of silence for those people who have died today and maybe shed a tear or two. No, but in this, as in every other respect, COVID-19 is it's unique. It is unlike any other disease or medical condition that has ever existed. Let us go back to the chat here and see what is going on. Just a chair here. Secession won't happen, says Dan Allison. The parasites aren't going to let the host get away. David Roy says, expect some harsh tweets from Trump now. Again, yeah, I think that Vox Day is right about this. We have seen that Trump says a lot of things and then he makes a decision. He is not the kind of person to restrict his future actions. Dan Allison says he is not going to declare martial law. British American says Trump needs to invoke the act, muzzle the MSN, and force feed the evidence of expletive deleters on the U.S. people. British American says he would have much more than half of the American people behind him. And Dan Allison responds, you can't get Americans off the couch for anything, even their freedom. Well, there were an awful lot of people who attended Trump rallies this year. So they're willing to get off their couch to wait in line for hours and hours and hours to see Donald J. Trump. Anwin says, is it true that Alito and Thomas issued dissents and wanted to hear the case? So much for ACB, Gorsuch, and Coach K. Look, these Supreme Court justices, they live in the world like the rest of us. And I suspect some of them, fear for their safety or for the safety of their family if they make an unpopular decision or a decision that is unpopular with the elite. Okay. Anwin says, I just don't think that will happen. We will see some kind of coup against Trump if he does it. I began this story by reading from Jim Kunstler talking about the clean out of the Department of Defense, how the CIA's ability to use the U.S. military as a private army has been taken away from them, and about all of these recent troop movements. YT says, don't all the letters of the alphabet hate each other? Gays definitely hates the lesbians. I know that years ago, I read reports that apparently, lesbians complaining that male homosexuals, were dominating what used to be called the LGB movement. But now, of course, it is the transsexuals who are in charge. Halper said, we saw what the stress of live broadcasting did to Bill O'Reilly. Are you referring to that clip where he just loses it and starts shouting at people near the end of his broadcast? It's right up there with the Casey Kasem going on about the dead dog dedication, if you've ever heard that. If you haven't, you should. It is hilarious. British American says they will be ignored by the colonel level commanders who actually command. I'll remind you all that the U.S. Special Forces swear their oath directly to the President of the United States. Fauci is 80. Why is he not retired, says British American. Well, I don't know, if you're a very powerful man and you get to adore your visage and voice on television every day, that's very powerful. I don't know how many, drugs are as powerful as that. Okay. Ashley Bravo says Fauci doesn't want to retire because he wants to sacrifice his time and efforts into helping the public with an ongoing pandemic. Yes. Such a noble man. Lizards. A lot of people talking about lizards. Ashley Bravo says, ask your doctor for... Okay, all right. I don't understand the spelling there. I guess there's no hope for state legislatures to defy the election day vote now. No, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. Nothing at all. But the theory is that the Supreme Court agreeing to hear the case would bolster the resolve of state legislators in Georgia, such as the weak will of the state legislatures, that they let Georgia get away with the recount that they had, which didn't. Well, I won't go into that. I don't want to break the terms and conditions. Dan Allison says technically there are still options, but the momentum and power of the Scottish decision make those unlikely. This is the equivalent of the day the GOP senators went to Nixon and showed him the door. Who was it? James Buckley and Barry Goldwater. That's if I remember correctly. YT says that I had a fly live with me for 3 days. I finally killed today because it wouldn't fly out the door. I actually feel guilty for it. Okay, I'm not a black pillar, but there's a lot of cope going on here. Not from me. Not from me. Oh, yes, Marie Harf. I looked her up because her name was familiar to me. And I was rather surprised that she's a quite good looking woman, although she has, for some reason, taken to wearing glasses on TV, perhaps because she thinks they make her look smarter. She began her career at the Directorate of Intelligence at the CIA as an analyst focusing on Middle Eastern leadership issues. She is very definitely then deep state. She glows in the dark, as they say. Bill Gates. What does our master Bill Gates have to say? I preferred Bill Gates when he was merely in charge of our operating systems and software and our internet browser. When he just wanted to be the dictator of the computer world and not the dictator of the whole world. This is from London's Daily Star. Bill Gates has offered his prediction for when the coronavirus pandemic will finally be over. The billionaire Microsoft founder has made a number of guesses about key events of the global health crisis that brought the world to a standstill. No, it was not the global health crisis that brought the world to a standstill. It was the decision of latrine wallahs, health bureaucrats, and cowardly politicians had ceded their power. I mean, they're merely elected by the people to these latrine wallahs, and the latrine wallahs decided that the economy must be destroyed, society must be destroyed, we must all be pushed into depression or panic. Sadly, Bill Gates doesn't think we'll be completely back to normal until halfway to 2022, although he believes things could start resuming in some countries over the spring of 2021. This week, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced it is committing a further $250 million to support the research, development, and equitable delivery of life-saving tools in the fight against COVID-19. It brings the charity's total contributions to the pandemic of $1.75 billion. Yes, ever heard that phrase? He who pays the piper calls the tune. I think that is applicable here. Oh, yeah. And New York Strong. Have we heard that phrase yet lately? Because I think we're going to. We've been told that, no. Don't listen to all those black pillars about the fate of New York. This is from Keith Griffith from the Daily Mail. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo will review a proposal to convert office buildings in Midtown Manhattan into apartments, as commercial landlords warn the exodus of office workers from the district looks increasingly permanent. The Real Estate Board of New York, whose members include nearly every major landlord and developer in the city, is proposing dramatic changes to zoning rules in Manhattan's last dedicated office district. So they built all of these white elephants, which are not going to be filled. This is a prediction that Jim Kunstler first made, 15 years ago or so. In October, only 10% of Manhattan office employees had returned to the workplace after fleeing in the pandemic, according to a survey from the Partnership for New York City. What began as a stopgap measure looks increasingly like a long-term trend, as employers find that remote working has little impact on productivity and consider permanently downsizing their office footprint. The survey found that employers expect that 2 of 5 employees who return to the office in 2020 will continue to work remotely at least 50% of the time. Of the employers surveyed, the vast majority, 72%, had offices in Midtown. Okay, let's say that you work in Midtown Manhattan in an office building on the 47th floor, and you are told that you're going to be working remotely for safety reasons. Wouldn't you might think that really kind of shabby apartment that I pay $5,000 a month for, it's not worth it anymore, because, I can move upstate, or I can move to New Jersey or wherever and not have to pay the insane rents of New York City. But I don't know. The governor seems to be persuaded that, oh yes, these office buildings. Yeah, I want to live in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. I don't know. This is from Global News. Which Canadians were more popular this year than Drake, Justin Bieber, or Ryan Reynolds? Yeah, these are the first three names that come to mind when you think of Canadians: Drake, Justin Bieber, or Ryan Reynolds. That is really, it makes me sad. The answer, according to Twitter users who voted with their follow buttons, is Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam. Yeah. This is the woman who told us at the beginning of this, the COVID-19, not really much problem. Just, exercise common sense. The real problem, the real virus is racism, xenophobia. Masks, no. Masks are not indicated for COVID-19. There's a Canadian journalist named Don Martin. He's been around for decades. He is perhaps the worst column writer in my country, which is saying something. I met him once, briefly, in Calgary, where I was at reporting on a political convention. And I was in a restaurant, and Paul Wells, who's now with Maclean's, he recognized me, and he introduced himself. And Wells had been eating dinner with Don Martin. And so Wells was very friendly and very gracious about my work. And Martin was getting increasingly frustrated and irritated by this. And the look on his face, it was obvious. Why are you wasting time with this nobody? Anyway, Don Martin has a column on CTV News: like the lockdown, sleep better on a ventilator, then refuse the vaccine. You know the sadism that long ago crept in to this health precautions? Oh, we're going to make you suffer. We're going to make you suffer. Having botched any pretense of containing the second COVID-19 wave. What, second wave? I thought we were on to wave 3 or 4. Get it straight, people. Containing the second COVID-19 wave with an effective blitz of testing, tracing, and infection isolation, Canadian politicians are being given a shot at redemption. One of the amusing things about reading Don Martin is that he does not understand that metaphors have a literal meaning. And so his paragraphs are typically mixed metaphor disasters. The smiling face story of this terribly sad year is the arrival of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which should be rolling out toward rolled up sleeves across Canada in limited numbers next week. It's what follows which will decide the electoral popularity of premiers, and though he's not responsible for the delivery of healthcare, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, if he is not responsible for the delivery of healthcare, why is there a Ministry of Health in the federal government? Why do we have a health minister? It is true enough that under our Constitution, health is the sole responsibility of the provincial governments. But back in the 1960s, everyone decided to ignore the Constitution when a Medicare or socialized medicine was brought in. Don't we need to amend the Constitution? No, we'll just ignore it. We will just ignore it. In the same way, education is supposed to be entirely a provincial responsibility as well, but we just decided to ignore that as well. There will be peeves and perhaps panics if vulnerable Canadians watch those they believe to be less worthy of vaccination moving ahead of them in the lineup. There will undoubtedly be distribution flaws. And if the shameful patterns of last year continue, long-term care residents and their attending staff will again get shafted somehow. Oh, here comes the tricky part, dealing with the anti-vaxxers. There's a legitimate argument that the vaccine should be mandatory, given that it takes about 2/3 of the population for community immunity. It's called herd immunity, and the vaccine may only work for 6 months to a year. In other words, if Canada hasn't achieved widespread vaccine compliance by next fall, this microscopic monster could stage a third wave comeback through the unvaccinated. Now, for the record, this writer can't wait to get it. Pick an arm, any arm, and I'll line up for hours without hesitation or fear to get the shot, all the while booking my winter getaway flights anywhere as quick as the quick cure for my pent-up travel bag. But there's an understandable reaction in a segment of the population that looks at the jaw-dropping speed of the vaccine's development, mixes in stories of some adverse reactions in the test group, and rejects the needle. Yeah, how about that? How about that? Yeah. We're just going to do this at record speed. And what's the worst that can go wrong? Well, we had these hundreds of people in Sweden getting narcolepsy from flu vaccine a couple of years ago. Who doesn't need to get vaccinated? Rhetorically quipped a doctor friend of mine, the person who loves living his, her, their life this way, wants to stay in lockdown, never board a plane, not send their kids to school, never see loved ones from out of town, plans to work from home indefinitely, sleeps better on a ventilator, and thinks indwelling catheters are super convenient. Now that's funny, but it masks. Oh, don't use mask in that sentence, you dope. It masks a serious message to the wary. You see what's happened here? The lockdown skeptics, apparently we are responsible for the lockdown. Now, how about that? That is quite a trick. Officials urge Canadians to stay vigilant amid grim COVID forecasts for the holidays. This is from the Canadian press. A vaccine in a week or a month won't help you if you get COVID-19 today. Yes, I saw these commercials from Washington State where they show people enjoying life in their home, and the next thing you know, tube down the throat, because that's what happens if you let anyone into your home. You will end up with a tube strapped to a bed with a tube down your throat. It's science, people. Okay, and yes, we need Theresa Tam, who apparently is Canada's most admired person, says that all provinces need stronger COVID-19 response now. People are still allowed to leave their homes. This is not acceptable. Let's look at lockdown skeptics from Will Jones. Kathy Gingell has written a cracking piece in Conservative Woman responding to the threat of Tier 3 restrictions for London, a decision on which is expected next Wednesday, though it is being trailed as inevitable on the basis that an expert, Professor John Ashton, said they were needed. The growing body of evidence of the shortcomings of the super labs set up to process hundreds of thousands of PCR tests every day must have passed him by. Even the BBC was forced to report hundreds get wrong results due to COVID test error in the week preceding this latest round of COVID scaremongering. That report is but the tip of the PCR iceberg. A week ago, research published in Clinical Chemistry confirmed what Dr. Mike Yeadon believes, that laboratory contamination is a major cause of false positive COVID-19 tests. Yet, once again, it is not wise scientists like Yeadon the government heeds, but fanatics like Ashton. You have only to stop and consider the number of people who've been told to self-isolate unnecessarily, to stay off work, to avoid any human contact, who've been taken away from their frontline duties. You only have to consider the number of hospital patients unnecessarily and dangerously placed on a COVID-19 ward where they really run a risk of catching it, to marvel at the insouciance with which these experts call for more closing down of society and the economy. Kathy notes a new report on the mass testing of 9,453 Cambridge students that last week found just 10 positives, 100% of which turned out on retesting to be false. I could ask the question, why isn't this the leading story? Oh my God, these PTS tests, they're not fit for purpose. But I'm reminded of a joke that I resaw last night from Community, where Paget Brewster says to the dean, "I can't ask you any questions because they would all be rhetorical and end with the word idiot." Undeterred, Health Secretary Matt Hancock has announced mass COVID testing for secondary schools in the worst affected London boroughs to try to curb rising cases in the capital. But is London really in the grip of a deadly second wave? Well, which wave is it? Of coronavirus that would rage uncontrolled if we do not maintain and even tighten the ruinous restrictions? PCR testing might give you that impression. And there are a bunch of charts that are produced demonstrating that aside from the cases, the situation on the ground is not catastrophic. Speaking on BBC's Politics Live Monday, Conservative MP and former Minister Carolyn Noak said, "I've kept my parents locked up since March, literally locked up. I've done all of their shopping for them, run every errand, and at one point parked my car over their driveway so they couldn't get out because I'm absolutely determined they are not going to increase the burden on our brilliant health service. Our brilliant frontline workers have been working incredibly hard over months and are exhausted. So to take unnecessary risks with the NHS now strikes me as being extremely foolhardy. That's why I supported the measures last week. I've seen my area go into tier 2, where there are still restrictions on the way people can go about their lives." She later claimed that her remarks were light-hearted. But there's nothing light-hearted about the thousands of surgeries canceled, cancers missed, and lives lost through people trying not to burden our brilliant health service. Now, again, here's another story, which should be at the very top of the screen of all the media, but somehow it isn't. The Telegraph reports on the shocking case of Thameside Hospital in Greater Manchester, where emergency patients were not tested on admission, and COVID and non-COVID patients are routinely mixed. Thameside Hospital in Greater Manchester admitted Jean Hale, 79, as an emergency patient in June and put her on a ward with COVID-19 sufferers without swabbing her first. By that point of the pandemic, NHS hospitals had been instructed to give coronavirus tests to all non-elective patients that required an overnight stay. Thameside and Glossop Integrated Care NHS Foundation Trust accounted for a third of the 52 COVID-19 deaths in England's hospital in the week to September 10th. It reported 18 deaths at the hospital, up from 6 a week earlier. Meanwhile, Telegraph analysts this week found that at least 100 of its 453 coronavirus patients since the start of August, equivalent to 22%, caught the disease whilst they were in hospital. Some have blamed a high number of deaths at the hospital and high rates of COVID-19 infections, as well as demographic factors, and have insisted that the hospital has rigorous infection controls in place. However, it seems not all the rules were followed. Another Telegraph exclusive from its sterling investigative work, the newspaper counted more than 10,000 patients who caught COVID-19 while being treated in hospital. Since August, more than 16% of people treated for COVID-19 in hospital caught it whilst there, rising to nearly 40% in Hampshire Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. This is quite good from a political theorist, James Alexander. He writes, "I think we have to distinguish COVID-19 from Polis 20. COVID-19 is a disease caused by a novel coronavirus which emerged in 2019. Polis 20 is the universal political response by governments aided and abetted by the information, opinion, and speculation establishments of various media, medical, and scientific institutions in the year 2020 to perpetuate a triple policy which deliberately seeks to dehumanize and desocialize us through the use of masks, distancing, and lockdown, and has the unintended but certainly well understood triple consequence of damaging the economy as a whole, ruining our lives by constraining our economic and social activities, and causing us to suffer more from deaths for other reasons, whether the reasons are economic, social, or indeed medical. Polis 20 is also novel, indeed entirely unprecedented. It is also foolish and evil. Foolish because of its triple unintended consequence, and evil because of the nature of the triple policy itself." Now, I mentioned the Washington State ad. This something even worse from Britain. The NHS has released a spectacularly distasteful Christmas charity ad that portrays Father Christmas, that's what they call Santa Claus in Britain, catching COVID and being oxygen before being nursed back to health. The Mail has given it a syrupy write-up, which seems to miss the mood of its readers, as if the comments below the line or any indication. It's the stuff of nightmares for children, as Father Christmas is rushed into hospital and nursed back to health in an emotional new appeal advert from NHS Charities Together. The touching film, entitled The Gift, which celebrates NHS staff and volunteers. Aren't they the brilliant NHS staff and volunteers? Features a dramatic opening with a very poorly Santa wheeled into a medical ward by paramedics and given oxygen. It appears to be touch and go, with machines beeping and staff in full PPE as they do their best to resuscitate the elderly gentleman. Thankfully, he pulls through, and over the coming days is nursed back to health by the caring ward staff. The comments on Mail Online were not so complimentary. There were over 1,000 upvotes for disgusting, manipulative nonsense, and nearly 800 for how horrible to show Santa unwell, like kids aren't worried enough. This is disgusting came in third with nearly 700, and fourth place continued the theme with NHS propaganda nonsense. Disgusting. Let's check in with Alex Berenson. Oh, he's commenting on Taleb, the math guy. And Taleb really understands nothing about epidemiology. The Kansas mass study is tissue thin for a half dozen reasons. The two most important are that the counties aren't close to identical, and the correlation between mask mandates and mask wearing is thin. These are basic concepts too, and too bad. And Taleb is too smart to understand them. And as I mentioned, he said this is bad to the browbeating of the FDA to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine Friday. Okay. And I'm moving on here. In just a little while, we're moving on to the book club. But I want to talk about the remarkable things going on in Hollywood. This is from the Mail, and my headline for this is stolen from Red Letter Media from Mike. Endless trash! Disney unveils 10 new Star Wars spin-offs, 10 Marvel shows, a new Indiana Jones movie, and a deal with the Kardashians as part of 100 new titles to lure viewers to its streaming platform. Disney's flood of new announcements on Thursday saw 100 new titles unveiled. Latest Star Wars offerings include 2 more series based on The Mandalorian. Kardashian family has signed a deal with Disney-owned Hulu after leaving E! Disney will also produce a Buzz Lightyear prequel and a Black Panther sequel. Does anyone ever write an original script anymore? Does everything have to be a tentpole? Apparently. The barrage of new announcements also includes 15 new live-action animated and Pixar series as Disney ramps up its efforts to outperform Netflix, HBO Max, and Amazon Prime in the streaming world. With COVID-19 shutting cinemas and making people desperate for entertainment at home, the TV and movie industry is banking on streaming, with Warner Brothers announcing last week that all of its 2021 films would debut on HBO Max. Including Hulu and the ESPN Plus sports streaming services, Disney currently has about 137 million subscribers, while Netflix has nearly 200 million. Meanwhile, cinema chains, including AMC, Cineworld, and Cinemark, have been left disgruntled by the straight-to-the-small screen plans, which threaten to bring about the death of the movie theater. Disney's latest Star Wars offerings include 2 more series based on The Mandalorian, a hit series featuring a character popularly known as Baby Yoda, as well as a return for divisive prequel star Hayden Christensen in a series about Obi-Wan Kenobi. When I saw Hayden Christensen, and what's her name, Natalie Portman, there was one of the movies they're in was playing on cable, and I was watching them acting, and I thought, how is it possible to star in a major motion picture when you cannot act? When you cannot act at all? But Natalie Portman, a good-looking woman, but she's terrible. The Kardashian-Jenner family has also signed a deal with Disney-owned Hulu, while films including Pinocchio and Disenchanted will premiere on the streaming service. which will see a $1 price rise to $7.99 a month. Oh, a new Indiana Jones film in which Harrison Ford, 78, will reprise the role. And there's a list. There's a little sidebar here. Star Wars, 10 series in total. Obi-Wan Kenobi series featuring Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. 2 Mandalorian spin-off series. Ahsoka and Rangers of the New Republic. Lando Calrissian TV series. Rogue One spin-off called Andor. A 2023 cinematic film called Rogue Squadron Marvel. 10 series in total. Disney Plus movies, 15 Disney and Pixar movies in total, and another 15 series. Pinocchio starring Tom Hanks. Enchanted sequel starring Amy Adams titled Disenchanted. Peter Pan and Wendy starring Jude Law. I saw on Red Letter Media, they were discussing this Tom Hanks movie, the new one, which is based on a C.S. Forester novel from the 50s, about flotillas of Allied ships moving from America to Britain and trying to, outwit the German U-boats. All of the water is CGI. And it's not so much that it looks fake, it's the uncanny valley effect. It just looked horrible to me, but perhaps people are simply, they don't know the difference anymore, or they don't care. Oh, Handmaid's Tale, renewed for a 5th season. Adaptation of the sci-fi horror classic Alien. Don't. Just, how many of those movies did they make? They even made Alien versus Predator. Oh. Endless trash. And some fallout from the Warner Brothers decision. Dune director Denis Villeneuve blasts Warner Brothers for HBO Max deal and reveals how he learned the news. They are no longer on the same team. The 53-year-old French-Canadian filmmaker wrote an op-ed for Variety in which he vented his frustrations over the major studio's move. He wrote, Warner Brothers' sudden reversal from being a legacy home for filmmakers to the new era of complete disregard draws a clear line for me. Villeneuve was also not pleased to have found out about the pivot just as everyone else did. He explained, I learned in the news that Warner Brothers has decided to release Dune on HBO Max at the same time as our theatrical release, using prominent images from our movie to promote their streaming service. This comes just days after it was reported that the studio may be facing a possible legal challenge from one of its collaborators, Legendary Entertainment, which produced the upcoming movies Dune and Godzilla vs. Kong, through their distribution deal with Warner Brothers, is considering suing the studio, according to reports. Speaking of reports, this is from David Eng at Breitbart. As small businesses around California struggle to stay afloat amid the latest round of stay-at-home orders, Hollywood studios are able to keep the cameras rolling thanks to the work of highly paid lobbyists, whom the studios reportedly hired to sway state politicians, including Governor Gavin Newsom. The Intercept reported that major studios, including Disney, Netflix, and Paramount, hired pricey lobbying firms to bend Governor Newsom's ear, successfully persuading him to declare the entertainment industry as essential and thus exempt from the state's lockdown orders. Paramount has reportedly spent at least $85,000 this year on the essential business rules developed by state agencies in California, while Warner Brothers spent $22,500 this year on a lobbying firm that contacted the governor's office for COVID outreach TV film production, according to a company disclosure. The Motion Picture Association spent $45,000 on lobbyists to shape the COVID-19 reopening of film TV sector. The Intercept noted that Netflix hired a lobbying firm called Axiom Advisors, founded by Jason Kinney. Last month, Kinney was reportedly among the partygoers at the French Laundry restaurant, where Governor Newsom was photographed mingling indoors without wearing a mask or practicing social distancing. You know the old saw about the French Revolution being sparked because Marie Antoinette had said of the peasants who, couldn't afford bread, let them eat cake. Well, the story's all made up. But this is really one of those let them eat cake moments. Let us return to the chat and see what is happening. Hickman Warrior says Morocco is pretty inexpensive, but getting paused, and I won't repeat that bit. Ashley Bravo, I thought this was supposed to be the most based and red-pilled Supreme Court ever. Well, the Supreme Court only is daring in one direction, right? For instance, when John Roberts discovered a new taxing power for Congress. After what? More than 200 years? 11, over 225 years, John Roberts said, hey, you have this taxing power. Wow. Congress has been around for 220 years or so, and we didn't know about this. Thanks, John Roberts. Let's see. I hope that's accurate. All right. Vast honeypot, among other things. This is Brendan Smith. What is this controversial leaked Biden audio all about? Oh, well, apparently he was recorded without his knowledge. And what happened was what he said privately did not comport with what he had been saying publicly, which led to a controversy about whether this should be reported. And let's see if I can find this tweet about this. A very prominent black journalist in the United States said that this is wrong because there are official sources. And journalists, as far as Biden is concerned, they should only use official sources. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Someone who follows me on Twitter called Epiphanes IV said, no shame whatsoever. White House press corps journalists trolled into advocating that media should only use official info from Biden. Literally do not challenge the administration. Even Canadian journos don't grovel that low. And April, yes. Edward Ongwiso Jr. said, it is irresponsible and sets a dangerous precedent for journalists covering the incoming administration to be able to use secretly recorded conversations in their stories. To parse out Biden's thoughts and anticipate his policy commitments, you must go through proper channels. And April D. Ryan said, agreed. The question is, who leaked this and why? Oh, boy, let's get the witch hunt going. April D. Ryan, like this tweet, the White House press secretary, the spokespeople for the president and vice president, senior officials without attribution, and the president's public statements are all designated and responsible sources for information and about the president's thoughts and YouTube's. Perhaps they should get YouTube's opinion on this. YouTube could deliver a judgment on what is appropriate for reporters to report about Joe Biden. April D. Ryan liked this. Revealing a contradiction between Biden's private thoughts and public statements is dangerous because it erodes public trust in the president, the office, and the media itself. These people are despicable. They're scum. They declared war on Trump long before he entered the Oval Office, and they kept up that war. It's still ongoing, for 4 years. Oh, yes, some spicy stuff about Hunter Biden and his father. Oh, and Joe's brother. We're just not going to report this. In fact, we'll just say it's Russian disinformation. Yeah, how about that? As I say, these people are scum. And they seem to have forgotten, that their past actions can be compared to their present ones. Palcazo 88, Hayden Christensen was good in Shattered Glass. Yeah, I suppose, perhaps because, he's so weak. That could be it. Anywhere Soros is, okay. Let's see, what else do we have here? Anran says, perhaps it has something to do with Christianity being dead in the UK. Okay, there's talk about countries to move to. All right. People talking about what, the Balkans? I was, back when it was still possible to travel, I was looking at, some of the lesser known countries of Europe. And then I found out that, almost all of Europe now is on the euro, which means that prices are very, very expensive. One would go to certain countries thinking that it would be relatively cheap, but not if your country is on the euro. The press is inauthentic, and there's a sexual insult here from a goose. What's the point in freedom of the press if they're just going to parrot the authorities anyway? Well, no, I mean, this has been obvious for years, that if it's an administration that they like, they believe their job is simply to lightly rewrite government press releases. That one of the reasons I got into podcasting is because with my background in the news, I would read stories and I think there's about half a dozen questions that are not asked in this story. Why not? Well, I know why, but I thought that it would be useful to point this out. The feeling Biden is recorded without his knowledge most of the time, says Halper. Let's see. Edward Richardson says Trump appointed 3 judges who rejected standing, appointed Barr, appointed the FBI guy, burying everything. Ain't over till it's over, but see a pattern. Emmett Kelly-Zer said Hollywood, trash or a vast wasteland, perhaps. Wasn't there some controversy about cannibalism or some such in The Mandalorian? I don't watch spandex movies, and I'm not interested in characters who are wearing helmets. One likes to see eyes in characters. At least I do. Let's move on now to... Oh, before I do, I just have to note that final note about Canada here. The New York Post reports today, Canada PM Justin Trudeau was upset over canceled invite to Chinese troops. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invited Chinese troops to conduct cold weather training in Ontario last year and was upset when it was canceled by Canada's defense chief, according to reports. Canadian media outlets, The Globe and Mail and Rebel Media this week published excerpts from secret government documents about the exercises, which were supposed to take place in 2019. I think you probably know my opinions on Ezra Levant. But look, Rebel Media broke this story. They're the ones who put the documents online. The Globe and Mail essentially lightly rewrote the Rebel Media story, claiming it as an original story, and they used 2 journalists to do this. The National Post reported the story at secondhand. CBC isn't. CBC hasn't mentioned it because I guess it is just not relevant. The training with China's People's Liberation Army was canceled by Chief of Defense Staff Jonathan Vance amid concerns that Beijing could use the trip to glean information from Canada, according to the outlets which cited the memos. But Trudeau worried the cancellation would appear to be retaliation over China's detention of 2 Canadian citizens, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, after Canada arrested Meng Wanzhou, an executive of Chinese electronics and communications giant Huawei. The memos showed that Trudeau insisted that Chinese officials be let down gently. Yeah, I don't believe Global or CTV are covering this story as well, but I will remind foreign listeners that our media in Canada has been quasi-nationalized, with Trudeau ponying up $600 million to bail it out. Of course, the CBC doesn't have to worry about money. But given that, media, because of the way that is you have this company owns this company that owns this company, vertical integration with telecoms. So these companies that own the media in Canada, they live or die based on decisions by the CRTC, which is a government regulator, the Competition Bureau. And so you do not want to get on the wrong side of the government. And this is true of any government. The media is supposed to be independent, but in my country, it isn't. It's that simple. So let's talk about some literature. And I want to talk about 3 novels. They are a trilogy by Louis Ferdinand Céline. And they have to do with the end of World War II. And the novels are Castle to Castle, which came out in 1957, North, which came out in 1960, and Rigadoon, which was completed in 1961, but published in 1969. The novels are translated by Ralph Manheim, who lived from 1907 to 1992. He was really a remarkable translator because typically translators are associated exclusively with one language. But he translated extensively from both French and German and other languages as well. And his most famous German translation is of none other than Mein Kampf. Louis Ferdinand Céline's first novel, Voyage à bord de la nuit, Journey to the End of the Night, it was translated shortly after. Mannheim has made a subsequent translation. Céline was quite pleased with the original translation. Céline was fluent in English. Let's see, Mannheim has translated Brecht, Günter Grass, Peter Handke, Heidegger, Hesse, Novalis. And yeah, he is, as I say, a remarkable fellow. Translated the letters between Freud and Jung. But let's get back to Céline. Céline, his given name was Louis Ferdinand Destouches, and he chose Céline as a pen name because he thought that his rather shocking novels might embarrass his family, and there was his standing as a physician. Céline was born in 1894, and he died in 1961. He grew up just outside Paris, and he talked about his parents' lace. Lace was made, and which meant noodles. Only noodles could be eaten because anything stronger than that would stain the precious lace with their smells. So Céline, I suppose he's similar to a lot of old style authors. Authors today, what? They graduate from university where they study creative writing, or they go to the University of Iowa or whatever to study writing. Céline was a man who had a vast amount of varied experience. And he served in the army during he joined the army in 1912. But he knocked around doing various things before he went to medical school. And Céline was what is known as a doctor. That is to say, he was both an MD and PhD. And in a really supreme irony, his doctoral thesis was about Ignaz Semmelweis. And Semmelweis was a Jew, and Semmelweis was run out of Vienna, essentially, after discovering how to prevent newborns and their mothers from dying of puerperal fever. Get the doctors and others to wash their hands. Unfortunately for him, there was no theory to justify this. The microbe theory of disease hadn't been invented at this time, 1847. So as I say, he was pretty much run out of the hospital on a rail and died an embittered man. And Céline's PhD thesis is a defense, a celebration of Semmelweis. Céline, he practiced as a doctor for many years. He did all sorts of things. He worked for the League of Nations, where he traveled to Africa, all over Europe, to America, and he made a study of the health effects of the factory line at Ford. And so his first book, Voyage à bord de la nuit, Voyage to the End of the Night, was an absolute sensation. And it's a doppelganger story which traces two men through the First World War. Céline was wounded. He was reckoned to be 75% disabled because of his war wound. And the book is kind of a yop, you could say, against inhumanity. And there is a character, a boy called Bébert. And later, Céline had a cat. He was a great animal lover. And Bébert features in the trilogy. Bébert was a very formidable animal who did not want to be left alone on Céline's peregrinations. And so it would leap up to his shoulder and climb into his bag on his back. And there is actually even a book by Frédéric Vitou that came out, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s, called Bébert, le chat de Louis Ferdinand Céline. It's not very many cats that have had books written about them. Journey to the End of the Night was Succès de Scandale. And there was a tremendous controversy about literary prizes that it was reckoned to, win the top one. But powerful people intervened to prevent it from winning. His second book, Mort Crédit, Death on the Installment Plan, as it is called. It's interesting, again, that the subject of anti-Semitism comes up in the book. And Céline, ridicules lower class or lower middle class anti-Semitism. He thinks it is ridiculous. Céline had been considered to be a man of the left, and he traveled to the Soviet Union as so many other artists did in the 1930s. Starting around 1936, he became obsessed with the idea that there was going to be another European war, and he came to the conclusion that the Jews would be responsible for this. And so he started writing pamphlets on this theme. Bagatelles pour un massacre, Trifles for a Massacre, L'École des Cadavres, School for Corpses, Les Beaux Draps, A Nice Mess. Now, none of these pamphlets were translated into English or published in America. So to say that Céline's notorious reputation in the English-speaking world derived from these notorious pamphlets that he wrote is simply, it's not true, because no one in English read them. And Gallimard, the great French publishing house, announced a couple of years ago that they intended to bring out new versions of them. And there was a predictable outcry, and this plan was suspended. Let's see. School for Corpses has been translated privately. During the war, Céline published Guignol's Band, which is about his experiences in England. And he continued publishing after World War II, Fable for Another Time, Normance. London Bridge, which is Guignol's band 2. So Céline is one of those authors who is associated with the Vichy regime. Céline famously said that that the Western civilization had died at Stalingrad. Now, I should explain that if one goes back to say before Stalingrad and even for some time afterwards, the opinion in France, and not just in France, was that Hitler was going to win the war. And so you saw a great number of French intellectuals, such as no less than Jean-Paul Sartre. They started cozying up to National Socialism because, they'd always been socialists, and National Socialism, it's another kind of socialism, right? In other words, they, like most people, wanted to be on the winning side. As it turned out, Céline was not on the winning side, and he was chased out of France. He ended up in prison in Denmark, and essentially he lost 7 years of his life as a result of his political opinions. Of course, one could say that he was lucky because there were others in his position who were murdered. At the end of the World War II in France, a great many scores were settled, and a great many of them were private scores, but were given a political coloring in order to justify them. And many were executed as well. Many of the collaborationists were executed. So in 1944, Céline is he's taken along with Philippe Pétain, Marshal Pétain, and many others to Sigmaringen Castle in Baden-Württemberg. And this trilogy is about the crazy things that happened. You see, you have the French government, the official French government is translated to a castle in Germany. And I suppose, you have the two groups of people. You have the true believers who think that somehow the Germans are going to come back and win the war. And then you see, the others who understand that the jig is up, or will soon be up. I should say that Céline was an inveterate jokester. He simply couldn't stop making jokes. And it's an arguable question just how serious he was in his pronouncements, or that his problem is that his pronouncements were so heavily ironic that it is difficult to understand or to appreciate just how sincere they were. But this trilogy it begins with him raging against his enemies and of the mistreatment which he believes that he has suffered, and it is very vigorous and very amusing. Writers who have been influenced by Céline, I'd say, would have to include Lester Bangs, Charles Bukowski, and perhaps most prominently Tom Wolfe. There's no question that if you look at Tom Wolfe's style and the use of ellipses, the use of slang, the use of onomatopoeia, it's Wolfe obviously fell hard for Céline's writing. I'll give you a selection. Okay, I know where I stand. They hate me. Nothing to be surprised at. But what about my friends? Supposedly heartbroken that I can't manage to make up for it with my medicine as a practitioner. That I got, blah, pure devotion, balls. With my intuition, my miraculous cures, and blah. The truth of the matter is that my old friends are mostly waiting for me to kick off. They all picked up a few manuscripts, papers, dribs and drabs at the time of the great pillage on stairways and garbage cans, in safekeeping, foreseeing once I kicked off, it was all bound to be valuable. But couldn't I kick off right away? Christ almighty. I know it's all that's been taken. I have the inventory in my head. Casse-pipe, Volonté du Roi Krogold, plus 2 or 3 rough drafts. Not lost at all. Not for everybody. Certainly not. And I know something else too, but I don't let on. I listen to my friends. Sure, I'm waiting for them to kick off too. Them first. They all eat a lot more than I do. Just one little arterial burst. Hope, hope. And I'll meet them all in Charon's boat. Enemies, friends, all with their guts around their necks. Charon smashing their faces in. Good. Ah, sadistic Norbert, he had it coming to him. Brutal. And Achille, they'll be torn open from ear to ear. They'll have a kind of loudspeaker for their nasty remarks. Each one of them, bingo and wham. Attaboy, Charon, it's all set up. Ah, Achille won't be thinking of his Suez stock anymore, or his De Beers, or his crosses. Square in the face, bang. Ah, they'll look sweet in Charon's bark, and the whole brain trust with them. Don't forget, their mugs wide open and their eyes dangling. That's how Charon treats his passengers. Won't it be comical? Much funnier than Renault and France. When my old friends came to take a little look to see if I won't be passing on soon, I get a good laugh. I see them on the sticks and Charon tickling them. Boom, bam. That's just for their thieving ways, those little faces. Oh, they're so clever. Locum's rosebud muth is just right for it. So blubbery and twisted, the only sounds you can make out are blah, blah, profuse bucca, cloaca. Hell, look, lovely split from ear to ear. The whimsical Norbert and Achille with his lascivious goo-goo eye hanging behind his ear. I can see it. Or a charm in his watch chain around his neck, fetching. Confidentially, my friends don't know a thing. Sure, they rub their hands over the Renault business, let them. But what about the Charon business? Hell, they suspect nothing. They deny, they smoke, they fart, smug, sardonic, practically sure of living 100 years thanks to those little pills. And those Mirador super drops. I may be a sap, but never mind. One thing I know how Charon will get to them. Boy, will they look funny in his boat. Split, that's right, smash and wham from ear to ear. Meanwhile, they give me a pain in the ass. They hand me a line. They perorate, they get drunk on hot air, and so sure of themselves. Their 15 shelf cabinets full of suppositories and drops, not to mention the aperitifs. Ah, what a selection. Sweet ones, bitter ones, total optimism. Ah, a dab of foie gras, a cigarette, 2 glasses of mums. You wouldn't believe it. The roadside restaurant at home, the freeway at home. They think you look pale and worn, depressed, neurasthenic, and they give you advice. Those diets you recommend are no good. In the first place, the living proof. Their wives keep telling them to stop seeing you, that you're wrecking their stomachs, their livers, their spleens, that you, single-handed, are capable of darkening all the fireworks in the world with your gloom, that you ought to be forbidden to practice because you've been in prison, and why not put you back? In a way, they're right, but I'm not wrong either. Drooling and doddering, okay? But plenty of ardor and passion about one thing. Having them all croak before me, the whole lot of them, let them wallow in steaks, etc., until they burst with all the trimmings. So gives you a pretty good idea of his style. And what earlier in this week, I read a couple of lengthy selections from Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff. So if you heard that and you heard this, then you could understand what I say about the influence that Celine had on Wolfe. Despite his politics and his history, Celine actually had a lot of Jewish admirers. Stanley Kubrick was one. Kubrick called him my favorite anti-Semite. And he once entertained the possibility of filming one of Celine's works, which would have been fascinating, I must say. Let's have a final look at the chap. Oh, yes, J5 Killer was making a bunch of Harrison Ford jokes, and here's one from Enron, Indiana Jones and the Titanium Hip. Okay. Let's see. I just looked it up. Okay. Yeah. Seems to be off topic. Is it wrong to pray for the downfall of the government? I can't see why it would be wrong. Okay, Hikmah Warrior got some 3 Blu-rays by an Iranian cineast. The one KMG did for TT was very good. The Samurai. Who are we talking about? Harris isn't even African Jamaica. She's more Tamil than anything else. Yes, she is. Indeed, she is. She is 50% Tamil Brahmin by blood. Okay. Oh dear, a funny joke from Pal Picasso 88, which I'm not going to repeat, but you can see it on the chat. Hikmah Warrior says many pro-right writers were executed after the war, like Robert Brasillach. Yes. And as I say, settling scores for the most part. I was curious to find that one of the leading collaborators later came around to a considerable admiration for the state of Israel for quite an understandable reason, which is that Israel fights for itself and never ceases fighting for itself, and is not a country devoted to surrender, as our Western countries are now, and as France was in the 1930s. So that is the show for today and this week. I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. What is coming up next week, culture-wise? On December 13th, I will be discussing John Ford's 1948 film, The Three Godfathers, which is a Christmas film. Yes. And on the book club next week, December 18th, I will be discussing poetry by my favorite poet, the South African Roy Campbell, who grew up in South Africa, translated to England, and then later to the south of France, Spain, and Portugal. I'm going to beg for donations here. I have to move in, let's see, 17 days, 16 days? Yeah, 16 days. And it's moving is always very expensive. And so if you would like to donate to this live stream, I would be most grateful. My PayPal account is linked to the email address kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, a donation can be made directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction, that in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.